just for fun. Great. Okay, well, let me get going here. Welcome to class today, everybody. Hope you've had a chance a little bit to maybe look at your trees and find some census records and try to corroborate what you've got there. Let's see here. I wonder. I'll just go ahead and start. So.
Get this.
Yeah. And this will be delivered?
Yes.
Yeah, perfect. All right, we'll be here.
All right, from 1 to 2 p.m.
Yeah.
or
If
2 to 3.
you guys could put the mute on.
What do you need to do?
Okay.
I'll be back.
All righty.
I'll make it 2 to 3, all right?
Okay, so we're in Beyond the Basics class, and today we're going to be talking about sources. Sources, good, better, best, and we're going to analyze what they are. See if they're good sources, better sources, or best sources. The quality of your research will be determined by the sources you use and your analysis of them. To help your analysis, sources are divided into 2 categories: primary and secondary sources. You may have heard these terms before. We're going to talk about these a lot today. So what is a primary source? A primary source is a record created about an event at the time of the event by an eyewitness to the event. So examples, vital record certificates, partially, and we're going to look at some of those later. Family Bible, maybe. Deeds, wills, military records, passenger lists, letters, journals. Now, letters aren't always about events that have an eyewitness, right? You could say, I heard from so-and-so and they said this, or they could be talking about something that happened a long time ago. So not necessarily on letters. And journals are usually, if they're talking about an event, it's usually at the time of the event. Although my journal keeping, it might not be at the time of the event. But certainly you're being an eyewitness to the event if you write a journal. So these are also known as original sources, and they include the original document and accurate, exact images of the document, such as a scan. And it doesn't include a transcription of the document, and we'll talk about that, why, in a little bit. Now, secondary source, as you might have inferred, is a record created about an event by someone who is not an eyewitness to the event. Most histories, biographies, family oral histories are secondary sources. Now, to be accurate, a history book or a history that's written will have probably a mixture of primary and secondary sources, right? But as a whole, it would be looked at, the history would be looked at as a secondary source. And same with the biography. Family oral histories is interesting. If you're interviewing let's say you're interviewing your 90-year-old aunt, and she's telling you about events in the past. She was an eyewitness perhaps, but it was a long time ago. And you can kind of see why, as our memories change and fade over time. I don't know if you've ever seen any studies done on memory and how weird it is. But so the further removed from that event, the less accurate it's likely to be, right? Now, if you're interviewing her about her experience that she had this past week visiting with so-and-so, then that might be a primary source, right? So but in general, family oral histories tend to be stories that are passed down in the family and not quite as accurate as we'd like. And we've talked about some of those. Hearsay evidence, those of you that have maybe watched a law drama on TV may be familiar with this phrase. Hearsay evidence is not admissible in court. And hearsay is something that someone heard. So for instance, if I'm on the stand and I say, well, John told me that Joe committed the murder, that evidence would not be admissible in court. Now, by our standards, what does admissible in court mean? Well, it means it's not a primary source. It's still a source. You can still say, maybe John, or Joe, whoever I said, maybe that really happened. We can consider that, but we have to look at who said it and what their knowledge is of the events. And okay, so secondary sources are also sometimes called derivative sources. They include abstracts, transcriptions, and compiled information. An abstract would be someone's looking at wills, original wills or scans of wills, but they're abstracting from that the pertinent information. So the names that are involved and who the witnesses were and the dates and all of those, that information. That would be a derivative source because it's a secondary source because it's coming from the original, but it's not the original. A transcription, the same thing. We've said that, when the minute you get someone involved in taking information, we're relying on their reading of the handwriting. Are they having a good day or a bad day? We don't know whether it was an accurate transcription or not. And compiled information would be a book of information. So you've got a whole book of all this great information. It's not that information is bad. It's just that it might not be as accurate. You're always better off looking at the original. When you're on Family Search and you've got a choice of clicking on the icon with the camera or the icon with the page there, always click on the camera first. If you have trouble with reading the writing, which I often do, and I've taken several paleography classes, it's hard. Then you can look to the transcription. A lot of times the people that transcribed had access to tools that made the record look better. They could make the writing, darker. And you can actually do that on some websites. Some websites you can't. But anyway, transcriptions are very helpful, especially as a backup to your own judgment about what a record says. But it's just under the classification of a secondary source. Why? Why do we make these categorizations? In general, the more removed the information is from the original document, the more likely it is that errors have crept in. And so it's our job as we're putting together these family histories to determine correct linkages. And that's what we're doing. And so when we use a source, we need to determine, have I proven the connection? And in order to know if you've proven the connection, you need to know if that source is trustworthy. So that's what we're doing. We're trying to gauge, is this document trustworthy? And have I proven the linkage? Okay, now we get to the fun part. Here's some, we're going to look at some records here. And the first thing I'm going to say is something, a lot of things I tell you I don't do myself. I usually go straight to the names and straight to the information. We really should read the whole document because it helps us to assess what's going on and how trustworthy the document is. So starting at the very top of this document. Well, first of all, let's look at it. It's from the Bureau of Vital Statistics, a report of a birth from the Department of Health in the city of Chicago. In other words, this was a birth certificate issued by the city of Chicago. Most of our certificates come from states. Chicago and a couple other places issued them earlier, and that's always wonderful, right? So this is not a state issued certificate, but by the city of Chicago. If you read at the very top, the physician midwife, when in attendance, parent or householder should immediately send the certificate accurately filed, filled out with unfading ink to the Commissioner of Health. Penalty for not making report within 30 days, fine of $10 to $100, or imprisonment in jail for 30 days, or both. I think most people filed these certificates. Anyway, so there was some teeth to this requirement, wasn't there? So reading through, if you look on the left side, it says refer to back of report for instructions. Well, I wish we could read that, but it wasn't copied, it wasn't digitized for us. So we can't look at that. That would be helpful. So here we go. Let's look at the actual, what was written in. We've got the name of a child, and all we've got is Rockwood. So no given name has been, Christian name has been given yet. The sex is female. Now, you see the FE, that the MALE is very prominent, but it's a female. So having it this big is helpful. When I saw it as smaller than this, it looked like male to me. Color erased white, date of birth, January 11th, 1905. And let me see. And what does it say? 5 a.m. All of your, you're covering that part of the, does it say 5 a.m.?
Yes.
5 a.m. Okay, thank you. Okay, place of birth, 279 Ogden Avenue. Residence of mother, same. This baby was born at home. Okay, this was not a hospital. Full name of mother, Margaret C. Rockwood. Maiden name of mother, Margaret C. Werner. Birthplace of mother, Evansville, Indiana. Number of previous children, none. How many now living in all? One. So this is their first child. Full name of father, Harry E. Rockwood. Occupation, lumberman. Birthplace of father, Omro, Wisconsin. Reported by Nathaniel H. Adams. Okay, so, and his address and telephone number and the date that this was sent in, which is a week after the record was created, after the birth occurred. Okay, and then you look at the bottom. The Christian name should be certified if possible when the certificate is made, and should in any case be reported within. Okay, so hopefully they reported that eventually. I have never found a record that they did, but perhaps those again weren't digitized and indexed. So our first question in looking at this is who created this document? Because we need to know if they're an eyewitness. So we need to establish, okay, who wrote this? Who wrote this up? Well, it says it's reported by the doctor. And so that's who we think did it, the doctor. Now, was he an eyewitness to the event? Yeah, we think he was. We think that he delivered this baby and he filled out this form shortly thereafter. Let's look at the information. So everything that he has recorded that he was an eyewitness to is a primary source in this. Was he a witness to the birthplace of the mother? No. So within this primary source, there's secondary information. He doesn't know for sure, then you have to think to yourself, okay, where did he get this information? Well, he had to have gotten it from, we know the mother was there, right? Perhaps the father was there, but we know the mother was there. we can kind of decide that the mother gave this information. Now, was she in labor? Was she in her right mind? Well, you know, you can have a little, give her a little leeway if it's not exactly accurate, right? But this appears to be information that to the best of the mother's information, or the father, whoever it was given, is accurate about them. And actually, through other records, I've determined that this is pretty good information.
Talk to you later.
But I wasn't. This is a primary source. I still like to corroborate it with other sources.
Hey, Sue, can I just make a comment to everyone? Please make sure you're on mute, because we're getting some background noise from somebody who's not on mute. So please make sure you're on mute while Sue teaches. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Okay, and now I'm going to ask you to unmute to see if there are any questions. No, why don't you ask questions to, is that Chelsea? And to see if, are there any questions?
Yes, there's nothing on the chat so far. So unless anybody has any questions right now. Nope,
Okay.
looks like you're good.
Okay. All right. Okay, now let's look at this death certificate, and I'm going to move my column here over to the left. Hold on just a second. Oops.
Okay, sorry. So Bertha Parle just asked, what about U.S. port of entry records?
Okay, let's talk about that. Hold on just a second. I kind of lost my place here. Okay, so in other words, the passenger list, you look at the information on there. We think the person that wrote it was an eyewitness to this ship coming in, right? And so what they see and hear, that's going to be a primary source, and that's considered a primary source. Now, if the person is talking about something else, you know, whatever's recorded there comes from the immigrant. And so even there's the eyewitness that's watching them emerge from the ship. They're getting, the person who's writing this down is getting the information from that immigrant. There may be language barriers. And so if you've ever looked at those records, you know that sometimes they got it wrong. Sometimes the writing doesn't accurately reflect what the name was. So
I was asking about border crossings. My
border crossings. Okay, thank you.
To the United States.
Okay. Those would be primary sources for the crossing itself. They would be. But again, any information on there that's not associated with the actual border crossing, where the date and the person, maybe any other information that they gathered, may be a secondary source. Does that make sense? Okay, I'm going to try to move. Here we go.
So Sue, did you answer this question? What about U.S. port of entry border records, border crossings?
I think I did.
Okay, thanks. I saw it. I just saw it in the chat and wanted to
Are
make
there
sure.
follow-ups, questions to any of that? Let me know. Okay, now here's a standard vital records certificate that you would see. This one was from South Carolina. It's a certificate of a death certificate. And if we start at the top, place of death, Richland County, Columbia, South Carolina, home address, Johnston, South Carolina, full name, Maddie E. Yance. I'm still going to try to move because I can't read this very well. Okay, let me see. For some reason, there we go. I can't see my cursor when, okay, now I've moved you out of the way. So we're going to go back to this one. Okay, we're all set now. The person, the full name of the person who died is Maddie E. Yance, registration district 38A, registered number 653 for use of local registrar. If death occurred in a hospital or institution, give its name instead of the street name. So we've got South Carolina State Hospital. And so the person died in the hospital. The residents in the city, and this is real, this tells me a lot about this record. 19 years, 11 months, 6 days. Okay, so what I didn't say in the birth certificate, the fact that the doctor said 5 a.m. If that had said 5:13, I would have felt better. And why is that? Maybe the baby was born exactly 5 a.m. But when babies are born now, I witnessed one recently in the last year, and the doctor calls out time, and the person or a nurse, and they write down the exact time now. And again, perhaps that baby was born right at 5 a.m. But if 5:13 had been down, then that might have been a little more immediate. In other words, that could give me evidence that he didn't fill it out a day or 2 or 3 or 4 after the event. I don't think he did. I don't think he would have remembered Evansville, Indiana, or, but we're looking for evidence, aren't we? So seeing the residents in the city being 19 years, 11 months, 6 days makes me feel better. Okay, so on the left-hand column, we've got female, white, single. The date of birth, 1873. So no date of birth, there's a year of birth there. And she was 68 years old at the time when she died. She had no occupation. Birthplace, she was born in South Carolina. Now the next thing is her father. The name of her father, William Yance, and he was born in South Carolina. And her mother's name was Martha A. We don't know her maiden name. And she was born in South Carolina. The informant, okay, here we go. This is the WHO, South Carolina State Hospital Records, Columbia, South Carolina. So this changes things. Let's talk about informants to death certificates. Usually in that box, you will see the name of someone. And a lot of times they'll have the same last name as the deceased. Often they were a relative, a close relative who's been asked to come in and give this information. Now, that information is only as good as the information that the informant had. So for instance, if it's the child of the person who died and they never met their grandparents, maybe they don't really know the names, or maybe they don't know where they were born. It might be a niece or nephew, it might be a neighbor. We don't know if they were, how closely related to this information they are. Now, if it's the state hospital records, what usually happens is when someone is admitted to the hospital, they fill out forms, right? And so they probably would have, Maddie would have probably filled out this form when she entered the hospital. So if her mind is working well, then this goes from, I'm not sure if this is right, to wow, this is her own knowledge and information. How great is that? So right now I'm thinking this is pretty good information. Now, the fact that she didn't know the maiden name of her mother, I'm thinking that maybe what she filled out for the hospital wasn't necessarily, it's not the same form, right? It's a different form. And maybe they didn't ask the maiden name. Who are your parents? And she put William and Martha A. Yance. That's what, that's what could have happened. So we keep going here. There's the burial, cremation, or removal. We know that she's buried in Aiken, South Carolina on the 26th of 1941. And the name of the undertaker and his address. and when this was filed. Now, on the right-hand side, medical certificate of death, date of death, June 26, 1941. I hereby certify that I attended deceased from June 6, 1925 to June 26, 1941. I last saw her alive on June 26, 1941. Death is said to have occurred on the date stated above at 11:15 a.m. The principal cause of death and related cause in order of importance, chronic myocarditis. Okay. The date of onset in that box, I see a 93D, and I'm not sure what that, at first I thought 93 days, but no, if he's been seeing her since June 6, 1925 about her myocarditis, then it hasn't just, the onset hasn't been 93 days. So I'm not sure about that. At the bottom, there's a lot of empty, it wasn't a homicide, it wasn't an injury. And so we get to the bottom and it is filled out by a doctor from Columbia, South Carolina. Okay, so we look at this document and we say, this information is a primary source for her death. In other words, Dr. Camgen, if that's what that really says, was an eyewitness to her death, or shortly there, he saw her once she was dead and certified that she was dead. And so this is a really good record of her death. And we know that that is accurate and that it's a primary source for that event. The other information, it's secondary, right? We don't know where they got the information. We're kind of guessing, but we don't know for sure. Now, I was intrigued by the 19 years, 11 months, and 6-day residence. I'm assuming this is Johnston, South, because she's not living in Columbia, South Carolina, right? She's in the hospital. She lives in Johnston, which is not close. So I'm assuming this means she moved to Johnston 19 years, 11 months, 6 days ago. And wow, what a good memory. I don't remember the date I moved in, where did this precision come from? And so I'm getting a little curious. 19 years, and we see that this doctor started seeing her 16 years ago, isn't it? Yeah, 16 years ago. So what's that about a doctor in Columbia seeing her 3 years, presumably after she moves to Johnston for this condition? Maybe he was the best, and so she traveled to see him. At this point, we don't know, but I'm getting curious. So what can I do to figure out what's going on here? I look at, this is 1941. There are census records. Let's go 20 years ago. In 1920, that's 21 years ago. So let's go to the 1920 census and see where she was living, to try to see where she lived before Johnston. So I'm gonna show you. We're gonna go to Ancestry, and no, I can't see my top part. Okay, there we go. So here I'm gonna look for Maddie.
There's no water or anything, is there in there?
I'll put 1873 plus or minus 5. Then I know she's born in South Carolina. Oops, that didn't go. Okay. Matilda E. Yance. That's Maddie. She's in Columbia. She's an inmate. What? Is she in prison? What's going on?
You know what, Sue, we can't see the
Oh, you can't see
Ancestry screen. We can only see the
Okay.
PowerPoint screen.
Thank you. Let me go back and see if I can, should I stop sharing and then choose?
Yeah, stop sharing and then you choose, it'll either say screen or desktop.
Gotcha. Okay, so I've entered all the search information in. I did MAT asterisk Yance, born 1873 in South Carolina, exact. And the first person here is Matilda E. Yance. She's in Columbia, and this is in 1920. She's born 1873. Her birthplace is South Carolina. This is her. This is the lady. She's an inmate. So now I'm thinking, is she in prison? What's going on here? And can you see where she is? This is actually a state hospital for the insane. This was a state hospital where she was probably committed. This changes everything, doesn't it? This changes everything that we were thinking about. Let's just make sure it says Hospital for the Insane. Let's scroll down. I'm going to make it a little bigger. And that's Matilda Yance, inmate. She's 47, South Carolina. I'm thinking this is the right one, but just to make sure, I checked 1930 and 1940, and sure enough, she's been in the state hospital since at least 1920. So now where's that information coming from? And let me see if I can get back. I can take you with me. Tell me if you can't see this. Okay, are we back to the PowerPoint now?
No, we're still on the
Oh,
census.
okay, let me stop. Okay. Okay, so what do we now think about this information? Who was the informant of the other information that we find on this death certificate? Probably not Maddie Yance when she was admitted to the hospital, but she was probably accompanied by someone. You would think her parents. And from the brief look at the census record, I have found out that lo and behold, that yeah, they were still alive. And so chances are they brought her there. And chances are this is their information, but I don't know that for sure. How trustworthy is this? It appears to be pretty trustworthy. Now, the residence is still bugging me because she'd been a resident for 21 years. And I'm not sure if someone didn't do their math right, if they're looking at the date she's admitted and there was a discrepancy there somehow. We won't worry about that too much, but is this a trustworthy document? Yeah, as far as her death, it's very trustworthy. This is a primary source. The other information I'd want to corroborate with other sources.
Yeah, the thing that got me was the fact is that she passed away at 11:15 in the morning, and they had to drive from Columbia all the way to Aiken
Right.
and get her buried that same day.
Oh, I hadn't thought of that, but it is the very same day, isn't it?
Yeah.
Maybe something that they knew was coming. And so they were,
They already have the grave dug, and because all that stuff in 1941, because I was in the funeral home business for a while,
okay,
and all that of the graves and everything, but in 1941, I guarantee they were dug by hand.
wow,
So consequently is unless unless somebody had a premonition to think this lady was going to pass away, to go ahead and dig the grave and then have to drive all the way take the body all the way from Columbia to Aiken and bury it the same day. That we're talking about
Nothing.
that she died about close to noon.
right. So half the day's already gone. I mean, it's
Yeah,
June,
they
so
weren't
there's a
on
little more
they weren't on daylight saving time in
Right,
1941.
right, right. Well, that's really a great observation. So we can infer from that. What would you infer from? Let me ask you that. What would you infer from that?
I would infer the fact is that somebody got the date wrong on the burial.
Oh, okay. That's a possibility.
Could it also,
Could this be a cremation?
Yeah, but it's done in Aiken, South Carolina.
could this
Yeah.
also been when it says removal, could it have been that that's when they released the body from the hospital?
No,
I-
no.
No, that's the burial date. That,
That's
Okay,
supposed.
yeah,
That's supposed to be the day that she was buried.
that is.
Okay.
supposed to-
So removal doesn't mean that the body was removed.
All removal means is that that someone's going to ship a body to another location from one particular location. If that was a removal, then the funeral director would not be in Aiken, South Carolina. He would have been in Columbia, South Carolina.
Ah, makes sense.
That does make sense. So another possibility, though, is that maybe she had a heart attack a day or two before and was
I've never
hanging on.
I was involved about 15 years in the funeral home business. Not as
Okay.
not as a funeral director, but as a part owner.
Yeah.
And I've never known a grave to be dug prior to someone's death.
Interesting.
And generally burial, unless they're Jewish.
Okay.
Jewish are supposed to be buried before the sun goes down.
Right.
Now, if this lady was Jewish, it makes sense.
No, I don't think she was.
Oh,
Wow, you've opened up another mystery. I've never, caught a death certificate in a lie. So you must know a little bit about death certificates too. How could they have been so wrong? He said, I last saw her on June 26, 1941. Was he just being sloppy? What do you think?
I don't. The thing is about it is that I have found in some of the entry work that I've done on Family Search, especially we've been doing a lot of Texas death certificate entries,
Right.
and consequently I have found a lot of discrepancies in some of those that I knew absolutely that it was a discrepancy just because of the difference in the time of day. I've had them buried before they died.
Oh, no.
So
Yikes.
anything here, the thing about it is anything is possible, and especially you find mistakes when just a change from the one year to the next. In other words, they they died in December the 28th of 1911, and then they said she was buried, January
January 1,
14th,
1911.
2011. Same,
Yeah.
same.
Yeah.
I mean, 1911, same
Yeah.
year, because they didn't.
They
guess
forgot.
They forgot that the year had changed.
Gotcha.
This
Okay.
this one here doesn't make sense at all.
Okay, now
Yeah,
I'm thinking this.
I would think that it's wrong and that you can see that it was filed on July 9th. And so I think when they went back and, filled in anything, they didn't know. So they just put the same day that she died. That would be my guess.
So could you look for the undertaker and the funeral home, perhaps find something and
Going back to, you'd be lucky to find anything that the funeral home has on record in 1941.
Yeah.
I've made some calls to a lot of different ones, trying to find little information that was messed up on death certificates and couldn't think. What I think happened here is I think that she was buried on the 27th.
Okay.
And when they fill that out, they wrote 26th in there.
They just were in a hurry and just filled that out.
They just wasn't thinking what day it was and just and filled it out, because this it looks to me like the people that made it out is at the hospital.
Right, it does.
Because the informants, the writing of the informant and the burial looks very similar.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And that's a really good, the only handwriting that looks different is that doctor to me. Maybe the same pen.
Even the J up here in the where it shows how long she was in hospital. That J on there is the same as the J on the June, on the cremation of the burial down there.
Exactly.
Now,
Yeah,
the only way you could probably find this out would be you're not going to find that out because they don't put that on the tombstone when they buried them. They just put their date of death.
Right. Now you might find an obituary that would tell another source for the date of death.
What's the chance of finding an obituary on someone that's been in an insane asylum for 20 some odd years?
Good question. Good question. I mean, they may have put an obituary in to let, I mean, it might be a local newspaper where they're informing everybody that's been worried about Maddie that, you know.
Yeah, well, why was her home address in Johnstown, South Carolina, and they're burying her in Aiken?
Johnston is close to Aiken.
It is?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Could Johnston, South Carolina, as the residence be, would that be where the parents lived when they took
Yes.
her there?
Her home they still considered Maddie's home to be in Johnston with her parents, and that's where her parents lived, in Johnston.
Yeah, that's what I would think, that's where she was when she was admitted.
Exactly. Well, y'all are doing really well. This is amazing. This is how we analyze records. And now we're questioning everything, aren't we? And that's good to be skeptical like that. And you can see how we can round out the information by adding more sources. No source, even a primary source, no source is perfect because people are fallible. People make mistakes. And so we need to corroborate it with more records. And that's really the solution to getting more and more accurate. What are some other records that you might look to see her correct date of death? I mean, if the state has it wrong, you know, heaven help us, right?
The only thing you could do, the only chance you got to finding out is you finding out through that undertaker.
Yeah.
And what his records are, because otherwise there's nowhere else unless there's another record that the state hospital has, but they're not going to show date of burial, I don't think.
I just looked it up and found her obituary. It's on Family Search.
Great. Do you want to share your screen and show us?
Yeah, let's see here.
Okay. Should I stop sharing and let you share?
Sure. Let me just get this. Okay, share screen. Okay. Can you see it right here? Now, what I have to do is I have to get this. There we go. Miss Maddie Yons. Can you guys see it?
It says services tomorrow afternoon. She died on the 26th.
Yep.
And the services are going to be tomorrow afternoon, which would be the 27th.
Yep. It's June 26th. It said she died today.
Yep. So whoever filled that out, just put today's date in it. And,
That was a mistake.
yeah.
Okay,
So there you go.
very good. Excellent job. You all get gold stars today.
Hmm.
Wonderful. Okay.
Actually, she might have been born on the 28th because the date of the paper, I think, is the 27th. And it says tomorrow at 4 o'clock, tomorrow.
Oh, you're right.
afternoon.
You're right. So she was buried on the 28th because this says
Yeah.
June 27th. So on Saturday, the 28th.
But it says June 26th in the article, meaning that's information that they got on the 26th.
And,
Right.
she
it's
gonna
just
be,
that-
the article's the 26th. And she gonna be buried tomorrow, which would be the 27th,
Yeah.
according to the article, not according to the day the paper was published. The day the paper was published was the day she was buried.
I think that's my interpretation. That, that date line says June 26th. So that was submitted. When it says today, that means June 26th that she died, but it wasn't printed until the 27th. They probably weren't expecting a large group of people to come to the funeral, I'm assuming. Another source would be the Lutheran Church now that we've got. That Reverend Haltewanger, that's a surname that I know very well. So there's a lot of good information. I like to say that when we find a source, a record, it may answer a question, but raise three more. And that's exactly what we've done today, isn't it? So,
So Sue,
yeah,
there's a question, if the person died at home and the informant is a family member, is that a secondary source?
if you can determine that that person was an eyewitness to the event, then that informant would be, that death record would be a primary source, but still the information on the parents would be secondary because they weren't necessarily an eyewitness to the parents being born in South Carolina. So there are very few records that are purely primary. The only information on here is a primary source. It's usually a mix. And that's why we need to look carefully at what we're, who is saying it, were they an eyewitness? And a lot of times those questions aren't answered. So let me see here. Okay, let's go back. And it's not letting me share my screen. Okay, here we go. Go to my desktop. All right. Now, here's a copy of a marriage record. And let's read it carefully. And again, this is giving me fits here. This is a copy of a record of marriage, okay? I, the undersigned, hereby certify that I am the Secretary of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, that as such, I have custody of the records of marriage required by law to be kept by my office, that among such records is one relating to the marriage of William Stell and Phoebe Marland, the place of their marriage. He's written in the date of their marriage. He's written in the information about parents and who performed the marriage, the date of the record, 1853. And then I do hereby certify that the foregoing is a true copy from said records. And then he signs it. Not exactly his real signature, but, and you can see, I actually ordered this record when I was 17 years old in 1973. You can see at the bottom, it says year 1853, volume and page and number. And so they went, when they got my request, and you can see that I had to pay $1 to get this record in 1973, the good old days, right? So he went to a record book and he looked up the original, and he, from that original, transcribed or abstracted the information and put it in this record. This whole record, while it's a marriage record, I want to say it's a primary source for the marriage, but not for the other information. It's not a primary source at all. This is a secondary source. Does that mean there's no good information on there? No, it doesn't. It's just, again, more likely to have some errors in it. Now, I'll tell you why I'm showing you this. Allow me to vent for a while. So I'm William Stell and Phoebe Marland are immigrant ancestors. You can see there that both of them were born in England. They moved to Massachusetts as young adults with their parents, and they met each other and fell in love, and they got married in Lawrence, Massachusetts. They were working in the factories. They'd come from the Manchester area in England working in factories to Massachusetts to work in factories. But as far as I didn't know William's parents and I didn't know Phoebe's parents at this time, this is my first inkling about their parents. So being impatient to jump back to the country of origin, I see this record and I think, okay, William's parents were William and Sarah Stell. And 1853, I know that they recently came to the United States. So they're probably in the 1841 census in England, the England census. So right away, I find George and Sarah Marland with Phoebe living with them in 1841. Perfect. I've located her in the country of origin. I've jumped back to the old country. I look all over the place for a William who was the son of William and Sarah Stell. And there just wasn't any. And I looked at, and this is before I'm not hopping from website to website, right? I'm hopping from microfilm to microfilm, and I am not finding it. And it's very frustrating. I wish I had known to not put as much stock in this record as I did at the time. I would have given myself a little more leeway with these names. The end of the story, without showing you my whole journey, is that the father's name was not William, but was James. Now, where did the error occur? It could have been William on his wedding day, nervously said, my father's name was William, or he could have said, maybe the father's name was actually James William. I don't have any evidence of that, but one of my cousins thinks that that was probably the case because later generations were James William. So maybe he said James William and all the person writing it down heard was William. There's a slight possibility that the person that transcribed it onto this form was not paying careful enough attention. It really said James, but he put William because William was on his brain from William being the person that is married. If that's the case, I want to strangle that man. Just kidding. I don't have violent tendencies, but I did waste a lot of time through my own assumptions that this was a primary source and therefore it's very trustworthy. No, it wasn't. And so it really does help kind of open up your searches a little more and can be very helpful because I would have found him a lot sooner. So, okay. Okay. This is a picture of a family Bible that we received just a few years ago from from a cousin, I believe, who is a lot older than we are. And so he wanted to give it to somebody who would take good care of it. You can see it's quite old. It's beautiful. You see the name on the bottom is Moses Montgomery. And that is my husband's second great grandfather. And here are the records. Here's the record. Now, there are several pages in here, I'll tell you. The first merely says record. And you can see writing in here that all looks like same person writing it, right? With perhaps, and the same writing instrument with perhaps a change at the very end of age 79 years. Looks a little darker there. Can't really tell enough if it was the same.
Does it keep going in and out?
Same handwriting.
It hasn't for a while.
It looks like the same handwriting to me, but probably not a big enough sample. So is this primary or secondary information? I can look at the dates. Hugh Montgomery died in 1846 and Moses I. Montgomery died 1903. That's a lot of eyewitness, right? That's a lot of years to be eyewitness. We're talking what is that? 54, 57 years they'd have to be watching, and it's possible. So then you look at, really, this looks like it was all written at the same sitting, doesn't it? That they're copying this into a family Bible from another record, hopefully that they have close by, and may have been a primary source or gathered from primary sources. But this doesn't look to me like a primary source. I doubt that this one person was an eyewitness to the event, or that it was recorded at the time of these events. It appears to be, although it's in chronological order, it doesn't appear that there was much change in writing instrument or in handwriting. So my guess is that this is not a primary source. Now, does that mean that this isn't good information? No, it doesn't. Okay. So the next page is marriages, and you can see the same handwriting starts this page, and then it changes by the end. So we're having two different people writing these things down. So for the question, who wrote this? I still don't know the answer to that. I don't know whose handwriting this is. I don't. So we really can't determine if it's a primary or secondary, ultimately, can we? Nor can we know if they were eyewitnesses to these events, but I think it's a pretty safe assumption to say that they were not. And then we'll go on to this is an interesting one. This appears to be, these are the birth records of children, and they're in chronological order, aren't they? I think mostly, yeah. But what it looks like to me is that there were two sections of children written in that first handwriting that we saw. Then the second handwriting came in and wrote some others for the evidently the third wife. And then, or actually that's that's the daughter of Moses. So a different family. But it also looks like that person with the second handwriting came in and wrote in a heading. These are the children of Moses I and Jane Parker Montgomery. These are the children of, so they're being helpful in categorizing, okay, that's who the parents were. This is not a primary source. It is a wonderful source, but it's not a primary source. So then we get to the deaths. Now, if you'll remember, under the first page of records, she had put in some deaths and then didn't know maybe there's a page for deaths. So we again see that first handwriting first, and then the second handwriting comes in. And then maybe even a third handwriting. I'm not really sure. But how do we figure out if this is a trustworthy document? Without getting hung up on the categorizations of primary and secondary are to help us. But we're not to be slaves to them. So does it really matter if they're primary and secondary sources? Now, those are just questions that we ask to help us determine how trustworthy it is. And I think you've seen from this morning that some of the primary sources are not necessarily as, as trustworthy as we might think. And the secondary sources may be pretty trustworthy, or they may not be. And so what's the lesson we learned from all of this? Okay, further analysis. First of all, there are times when people fill out records that will be a primary source, but they were actually not telling the truth. Military records are notorious for this, when young men signed up and wanted to fight in the war because all their older friends were going and they wanted to go, and they lied about their age. My grandmother was born in 1899 and she was 17 when, anyway, she ran away from home to go fight in World War I. Her mother followed her and dragged her back home. She did not get to serve in World War I, but she did lie about her age. She was willing to lie about her age in order to fight for her country. The other, ladies never tell their age. That's a direct quote from my other grandmother, my Southern Belle grandmother. And it's a cultural thing. And to her, this was true. So anytime she mentions her age in any documents, I don't believe it at all. Sorry, Nana. You told me you were going to lie about it, so I don't trust it. I need to corroborate what she says with other information. I need to corroborate what everybody says. So the questions again, were they an eyewitness? Or who was the eyewitness? And what was their role in the event? Those are questions that you should ask. And in other words, how trustworthy is it? This is all to lead to the question of, have I proven it? Now, notice in the beginning, I said good, better, best for sources. Is there no such thing as a bad source? Almost. Anything that is undocumented is a bad source, especially online trees. And, bad is, there's a moral squint to that word, and I don't mean that, but you just can't use that information. If there's no source, if you go to a tree on Ancestry and they've got some great names and it looks like, oh, they've found so much more than I have, and this is so great, I can extend my tree, but there are no sources, or they have a source that's completely unrelated to the linkage and doesn't prove the linkage, that is a bad source. That is a bad source. And we really can't do anything with that, but look for more records. It could be helpful, right? You see a name there that you hadn't seen before. It's always easier to have something to work with to either prove or disprove, isn't it? So it can be helpful to your research, but it certainly can't be adopted into your tree until you've done a lot more research. So regardless of primary or secondary, the number of sources is the key. I think we're all seeing that, boy, we need a lot of different sources to tell us about even one event, right? So in summation, and I can't read my summation, but there's something about primary and secondary sources. Incorporate as many sources as possible in your research. And then the last idea I'm going to leave with you, and maybe we could discuss this a little bit, include the analysis of your sources in Family Search. And I think a great place to do that is in Collaborate. If you hit Collaborate and add a note. It can help people coming after you. I'm going to actually go to Family Search now. We have time to do that. So first of all, are there any questions up to this point? Any comments or questions?
Sue, another thing on that line, which is, I've
Yeah.
had personal experience with several of those, is that I had one that where they were this, on the census, they were the same age 10 years later. Well, what happened was they had to show that they were young enough to work when they immigrated.
Ah,
So they lied about their age in the beginning and then
Okay.
caught up with them 10 years later. That's just one funny source, but I thought, this is weird. And and I just had one yesterday where Find a Grave, they had assumed it was this Find a Grave who we think gets their records, but it wasn't the same one. And I just got a note from this collaboration, what you're talking about, it works really well because she said, no, she's still alive. And it was the wrong one in the wrong family with the wrong parents' information in Find a Grave. So that's the importance of your secondary versus, following up sources. So this has been very good. Thank you.
well, thank you, Sandra, for mentioning Find a Grave, because I wanted to target Find a Grave because it's dangerous. Talking about undocumented sources for information. You look on Find a Grave and they will have the father and the mother and the siblings and no source. Where do you get that information? The implication is that there's some kind of cemetery records that are telling them that, but no, these are people that are putting up their information. I'm not sure, I've never contributed anything to Find a Grave, so I'm not sure if they're given the ability to include sources, but I've never seen a source. I mean, you can see an obituary with the name of the, so you can find the newspaper with the name of the newspaper, the name and date. But be careful with Find a Grave. When you go to Find a Grave, try to determine how trustworthy it is. And certainly don't take it as, oh, good, I found it. I think that a lot of people are using the information on Find a Grave like it's official, like it's a primary source, and it's really not.
Another example
Yeah.
would be don't trust the census information. My example is my step great grandfather in the 1920 census, I think, maybe 1910 census, I can't remember, said he was married to Josephine, but they really weren't, because I found the actual marriage certificate some years later.
Okay.
I mean, it's just,
Yeah.
okay, we're living together, but I don't want to admit that.
Exactly. There's often the case where I find a little bit of discrepancy between other documents and what they're saying on the census in terms of, maybe the wife is a good deal older than her husband, but it's not reflected in the census. So there is this kind of intimidation factor face-to-face. Someone comes into your house or, even meets you on your front porch and you're giving this information. You're kind of telling someone about your life, and maybe you don't want to share everything. Maybe you don't want them judging you. So really good thoughts on that.
I have a question on
Yeah.
about the family Bible thing.
Yeah.
I was in the insurance business for 50 years, and somewhere along the line, we were taught pretty much that family Bible information was gospel.
It's in the Bible, right?
Well, no, yeah, it's in the Bible. Somebody thought enough of it to put it in there, so it has to be correct.
Right.
And I can see, I can see where you're coming from, to where that if it looked like it was all put in there at the same time, that you don't know exactly that it was 100% correct, as opposed to if you find it entered in different handwritings and you can tell that it was entered in at different times, you know, you would have more belief that it was true and correct.
Yes.
Yeah, we have
And-
one in our family that it's in a museum down in Bay City. And I've seen photographs, photos of it, but I haven't seen the Bible. And I know that a part of that in there that it's entered in different times, like the day that it occurred.
Right. And I wanted to find examples of that where you can actually see the different pen or you can tell when it's a new entry.
Yeah.
And that does make it more reliable because it's more likely that it's written by an eyewitness to the event at the time of the event, rather than a whole listing. However, I must say that in the years that I have tried to corroborate this family Bible, which hasn't been very long, but it appears to be very accurate. So I think your point is well taken, that for someone to write it in the Bible, they thought they were pretty sure about it. Anyway, whoever they were, I don't even know who they were at this point.
Yeah, well, we had a lot of run into problems where we'd get a death certificate that was different than the date of application for the life insurance policy on how old that person was when they took it, and we had a death certificate, but yet we've been able to go and you take the family Bible and say, this is what the family Bible says, and we've had the insurance company rule on the Bible instead of on the death certificate.
Okay, interesting. I do know that I've gone to the National Archives a couple of times to get Civil War pension records. And there's often a page of the family Bible that was ripped out to prove, you know, when someone was born and their right to pension.
Yeah, well, when you mentioned that, I have a great grandfather that we've been trying to find source on, and he just eat me alive that I haven't been able to find anything. But the one interesting thing, and you mentioned that Civil War thing, was that he supposedly was killed in 1863. And she didn't apply for a Civil War pension until 1910. And we try and figure out why in the world would somebody wait that long to apply for the pension, which it was denied. And since we don't have any reason to know why it was denied, whether or not he was killed, not related to the war. It was another thing. He had been a former sheriff, and he was killed within 30 miles of where he was sheriff.
I see.
So we were just thinking, well, maybe he run into somebody that he had problems with when he was a sheriff, and they shot and killed him.
Maybe so.
You know,
They saw an opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna take you more of your time. Thank you.
No, that's yeah, I would say that now I don't know the dates on this, but there was a lag. Pensions were not offered right away. It took some time. Does anybody know when they started giving pensions? But it was quite a while after the Civil War was over.
Well, we're talking about almost 50 years, 45 years
Yeah.
after that she applied for the
I
pension.
think it wasn't too much before then, because I
yeah.
remember thinking, oh, now they're offering to help people when most of them are dead, right? That's very generous.
Yeah, widow's pension.
left.
Yeah.
Fortunately, she lived a long life, 90 some odd years old. So
Okay. Anyway, it might be helpful to look at when those pensions were created. I know there was a pension for Confederate soldiers and a pension for Union soldiers, and they weren't done at the same time. So I don't, off the top of my head, know, but they weren't particularly close to 1865. You know, it took a while before the need was determined. It probably wasn't the early 1900s, but that would be interesting to know.
Sue, I have a question about primary and secondary sources.
Yeah.
Let's say that you have a newspaper article that was written during the time of an event. Let's say a prominent building burned, and the newspaper reporter wasn't there at the time, but his story included eyewitness reports. Would that be considered a primary or a secondary source?
I think that would be considered secondary
Mhm.
because the person writing it was not an eyewitness, and they talked to eyewitnesses, but that would change it to hearsay.
Mhm.
Because if the eyewitness was writing the article, then that would be considered primary.
There
But
was
again, don't. Go ahead.
I was going to say, we had a grandmother that was shot and killed in Oklahoma by her husband in front of a cafe. And we have newspaper clippings showing 3 different newspapers reporting it, and all 3 of them are different.
Right. Well, the whole, you've got, 3 witnesses to a car accident, and you get the account from 3 different people, and their account's gonna vary. People see things differently. We're detectives, and we're trying to get as close to the truth as possible. The bad news is that, you know what? We're not gonna get the absolute truth on everything. We're just not. Because humans aren't very good at accuracy. But the good news is that if we interview all 3 of those eyewitnesses, we might be able to put together a story that's a little closer to what actually happened. They each saw a different element to the accident that gives you something else to, it's kind of like the blind man and the elephant, and you're getting a report on what the ear felt like and what the tail felt like, and that's an elephant, right? That's what we're doing. We're putting together a picture from a lot of different points of view. And so you get more of an elephant the more people you talk to, right? The more blind men you talk to. And so that's why our kind of research is kind of never ending. We're going to find more and more that not only confirms, but enriches, right? It confirms data, maybe it doesn't, maybe it disputes it, but it enriches the story the more different sources we have that information. Okay, I'm going to try to see if I can share my screen here. Okay, so I'm going to go to Family Search now. And I'm going to demonstrate some things about there he is. There it is. Okay, that's okay. Now here's a record of Colonel Ninian Bell, who was born in Scotland and came to the colonies and was a mayor of Georgetown, which is an area of Washington, D.C., and was a very prominent person. He's got a lot of descendants. And can't flip you all right where I can't read it. Here we go. Okay, now I can see it. Okay. You can see there are 36 sources. There are a lot of collaborations, memories. These are some examples of ways that people have collaborated. I want to show you this one. You might get a kick out of it. I sure did. Okay. I have worked very hard on trying to add documents, records, etc. Please don't remove anything on him. We are to collaborate together, not destroy someone's tree. I have 10 different trees in Ancestry, and I also have a program downloaded to my computer with all the information. So I don't delete anyone else's family member or ancestry. Please don't mess with mine. Thank you. Okay. This is the work of a very frustrated person, right? This is someone who's gone to a lot of trouble to put what they know up, and someone has come in and changed it. And if that is your, I don't expect that to be, happen to you, but if it were to, I think this is a really good note to put up. I might word it differently. What I would probably say, and what would be more persuasive, I believe, would be to write down your thinking about each disputed thing. Someone put in a note, I have as birthplace Dumbartonshire, Scotland. Then someone has put in a link. You can see that this really is a collaboration of everybody's coming in and giving their information. Under discussions, there are disputes, Ninian Bell's alleged ancestry. To date, no one has ever provided proof of the ancestry of Ninian Bell, while some claim as blah, blah, blah. Okay. So they're hashing out the evidence together. They're going over what they know from their research. Usually when I research something deeply, I'm the only one doing it. And so after taking the family search class here, seeing some of the lessons presented, and also seeing some of the problems that I get on family search, I haven't done this yet, but I'm going to start under collaborate. You click collaborate and then hit the note, add a note or a discussion, and tell people my thinking. I put this person as the father because of this evidence. And it can be pretty complicated, but I really should let people know that. And if they have a problem with that, then rather than change it, that will invite them to discuss it with me. And that's really the best I can do. I can't prevent anybody from coming along and changing it. But if I put my analysis, particularly my analysis of the sources, is what we're talking about today. If I put down, I feel like this is a trustworthy document because XYZ, the handwriting looks good. The informant was this person, and I know that they were there at the time. Whatever you know about the trustworthiness, that can help someone coming along who's not quite as well-versed, but they have seen something else that might dispute what you put in. That's really, to me, the beauty of family search is that, when we do collaborate, and the best way to do that, I think, I don't know if any of you you can put in your sources, and you should put in your sources, but to comment on the sources in the collaborate column, I think is a great way to do it. So just put that seed in there and see if you want to take it anywhere.
Well, when you add your collaboration information, then it documents it by putting your name in there, and someone could email you if they have a question. Is that right?
That's exactly right. Or they can respond to what I put right there on the page and say, I beg to differ. I've got this document. What do you say to that? And I might go, oh, I haven't seen that. Thank you. Let's combine the two together and see what we come up with. Or I might say, yeah, I've already seen that. I discounted that because I feel like this is better evidence. You talk about it. So yeah, they could either decide to do it publicly or privately. I've got my email address up there. They could send me a message in Family Search. There are a lot of different options for how they can collaborate with me. But I invite that as a researcher. The more people that are invested in this and help out, again, two people can do so much more than one. And so together we can get a much better product, especially now that we know that the more sources, the better. I don't just say, okay, I've got a source, so we're done. That would be nice. Actually, it wouldn't be nice because I like to do the research, but sources. We need to get as many as we can.
I have a question.
Okay.
There's a family tree on the internet that has to do with my ancestors.
Mhm.
And so someone that put this together, I have no idea who did it. I have a couple of other sources that collaborate some of the information in there, but there, there's names of the parent, the child, their children, their children, their children, and it's called the Sweeney family tree, I believe it is. But anyway, the thing is quite elaborate.
Mhm.
And somebody's gone to a lot of trouble to put that together.
Mhm.
Now, there's no collaboration on it.
Right. Right. And is there no way to collaborate? Where did you find the tree?
I would just search. I just happened to find it listed. I
Across
was doing some research and found it listed on there. I have, and since then, a lady put together a Sweeney book. Then she went to quite a bit of trouble tracing her ancestry in the Sweeney family, and she's put a lot of that information into this book, which that has helped collaborate the tree. But how much of that did she take off the tree to put in the book?
There you go. That's right. That's exactly right. And so unless they include sources.
There's no sources on, and if you look it up, just as the Sweeney family tree, if you just type it in, you'll see what I'm talking about.
Okay. Then that relates directly to what I was saying about ancestry trees with no sources. It's not that they're not helpful, because they can be helpful. If you're looking for some place to start with, it gives you something to disprove, if nothing else. But I can tell that you're skeptical of it because there are no sources, and you have every right to be. If people want to be respected, if they want their work respected, they list their sources at a minimum. And the best would be to list their sources and have some way of recording their analysis, the way that they decided that this was correct. And we're talking about every link. And so every linkage that takes you back, we want to prove that. And when they put in people that are connected with no sources, then that's really worthless to me without, unless I can use it as a springboard from other research. It certainly doesn't bring me any closer to the truth than I was before seeing it. And that's really unfortunate, because probably, the person had sources. They could have listed them on their work, and then you would have some idea. You could start to gauge its trustworthiness on your own. What they're asking you to do is trust in their ability to tell if it's trustworthy. And we can't do that because, we don't know them, and we don't know, their thinking. So we can learn from that, and that's not what we're going to leave to other people. What we're going to show, we're not only going to show sources, we're going to show our thinking behind the sources. And then people can use our work and it can be helpful to people. Okay, any other questions or comments?
License and your signature. I'm here. And I'm gonna mail.
Okay, well, I think we're going to end a little early today. Thank you for the participation, and we will see you again next week.
Take care.
Okay, bye-bye.